Hi hackers, welcome to the second talk of HackUPC 2021. In this second talk, we will be working with Mark from HappyScribe, and he will explain us how to make a startup and how it is a viable alternative for students who are coming out of university. So, without further ado, you take it, Mark.
Hey everyone. So I've seen like a couple of you have solved like this small puzzle of what this meant. This basically meant that asterisk startup in C++ is a pointer to the variable hackathon, and it basically like the memory address of the variable hackathon, and it was just to illustrate that sometimes when what you do in a hackathon is actually very similar to the very early days of a startup. And sometimes you can just take like what you've done in a hackathon, and it's quite just with a bit more work, it can snowball. So this talk should have been called actually why you should consider starting a startup, and we'll be seeing things like, for example, some hidden options when you finish university that you might not be aware. Why building a startup might be easier than you think, why it might be a good option actually, and then some common failure modes that you should try to avoid if you ever want to do this, and then some references so that if you're interested actually in this, you can just some pointers to some interesting resources that you can browse. So the KPI of success of this talk, like if this can help at least one person make a slightly better decision after university, this will be considered a huge success. And as I said in the introductory presentation, I'm Mark Asens. I'm the co-founder and CTO of HappyScribe, and during the last 4 years, I've been building this startup. What I forgot to mention before is that it's a bootstrapped startup, so we do not have any investors, and I'll go a bit more into detail. So once you finish university, what we're saying at least is that if you decide not to go into academia, the most ambitious people, they try to go into lists like FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, etc. And this can be like a really nice option. But there are some options as well that maybe are a bit more hidden that might be interesting to consider. And one is like a startup, and then the other one is the lifestyle business, which is kind of similar to a startup, especially in how it begins. To give you some ideas, Basecamp, for the ones that know it, is one kind of this kind of business. And then there's like a website called Indie Hackers, and we'll talk later. But a lifestyle business is this idea of, because software allows you to scale and it gives you such a vantage point, it's not that difficult to build something that works, and then tailor it a bit to the lifestyle that you want. And this can be, if you don't want to work a lot, it can be like working very few hours a week, like maybe 4 hours a week, and you have something in the background that works. Or it can be as well like designing a lifestyle. For example, you automate all the boring stuff, and all your time is just on cool stuff like building product or things that you really like. So it's this notion that it doesn't have to be super ambitious. It can be something like not that big, but it can be super viable, and you can have like a super nice lifestyle, leveraging technology and the vantage point that it gives you. And then once we go into startups, another thing that's not very obvious is that there's actually two like families of startups. One of them is the VC-backed. VC stands for venture capital, and it's the ones that they have investors. And most people think that a startup is actually this, but no, a startup is just like a project or company that's designed to scale and grow very fast. That's like the definition, the most accepted definition. And there is this other family of startups which they just start. They are viable since the beginning. They reinvest their revenue on themselves, and they grow as a like normal, healthy business. And some examples are Atlassian, JetBrains, and GitHub. Some of these companies they've taken like after a couple of years funding, but they did start as a bootstrap company. So just to give you a bit of perspective. And so let's go into why it might be easier than you think. The first reason is that this like software gives you such such an advantage over so many other like projects or businesses. If you go today outside of your house and you look around, most of the things that you see, restaurants, shops, all like agencies, all this, like, by building software, this kind of things scale very differently to software. By building software, you're in such a vantage point that it's really profound, and it has a lot of ramifications. And it's like normally it's not like that well understood, like how of an advantage is it. And just because you're engineers and you have access to this, you are like on a really good position. And I'm not sure if like some of you might know this, but this is Calamonjoy. This is El Bulli, a restaurant. El Bulli was considered for 5 years the best restaurant in the world. And if you look inside and you see a documentary or something, you'll see that the inside is like a machine, super well-oiled machine. It works perfectly. Like the chefs, the attendees, everything is like amazing. But because you are in this position of engineers and you have like an army of robots that you can make work for you, it's not that difficult that you can create something that works better than this in terms of scale. So just to give you like a perspective. And then another big reason is that it's kind of obvious, but when you build software, you're distributing it to all over the world. And this means that you can actually build something that's quite niche, a very like specific thing that you might think that not a lot of people might use it, but because you're distributing to so many people, it's not that hard to get like a couple of users or to get enough users to make something sustainable. And this is often like overlooked. And some examples. There's this guy that developed Dracula theme. It's a theme for VS Code. It's a pretty nice theme, and just one guy from his couch built something that in a bit of time made 100K. And this follows this trend of building in public, which maybe some of you know, but it's people that they make like kind of hackathons and then like startups, and they do everything very public, publishing lots of blog posts about it, and it makes for super interesting stories, and it allows you to like view a bit have an insider point of view. And then there's this other page in the Hackers. This is like you have this page where you have like so many different stories, and you can browse stories, and you have filters to see different types of like business models, categories, how many founders built it, and you can spend like some time here seeing and having this like very interesting view of many different projects. Then another thing that's very important to understand is the concept of dogma, and there are different knowledge systems, mainly the scientific system. That's like the one that is taught at school, and most like complex things are built on like using this system, which is like hypothesis and like you know the scientific method. But what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of knowledge is the things that you think it's knowledge, it's actually dogma, and you think this is true because some authority says it's true, not because you have tested it and you are like very certain that this is true, but you have confidence in some authority that it's saying it. And here you have some examples in doodles. And you can think something and be super certain about it because your opinionated friend said so, or because your dad said so, because your culture, your religion, because conventional wisdom said so. Like conventional wisdom, it's an authority as well. Because there's a quote you saw somewhere that says so, it must be true. It's like the authority of the quote. And this is like really funny because you're all students. You've seen, you've attended like lots of classes, and if you like pause a moment and reflect, for sure at some point a professor has told you something that was wrong, and you didn't realize, and you think it's true, right? You're thinking right now, you think it's true. So this gives you a bit of perspective, and this could be because like this thing is thought like right now to be true, and in the future it's gonna like be demonstrated it's false. But a bit like what this talking about point ends up is on you have to own your knowledge, and if you're building a startup and you're trying to build something that's new and doesn't exist, you really have to own your knowledge. You cannot rely on like believing everyone, because you cannot build anything new if you do that. A great example is electric cars. For so many years, electric cars seemed impossible to make, and they were ridiculized everywhere, and it seemed impossible. And then this guy, Elon Musk, he looked at the physics of it, and he looked at first principles, and after a bit of time, he decided that this was actually like possible to build, and then you have Tesla. And if you understand really well dogma, then you can assess. There's this other point on startups, which is risk. For some reason, like most people think they are risky, or it's like a big risk to take. And we've seen that in maybe in the US, not so much. When you say you're building a startup in the US, people mostly encourage you. But when you say it in Spain, at least in our like experience, the direction is a bit more like, wow, like this, it's a big risk, and sometimes people look at you with this like view of like feeling sorry for you, and a bit like what the conclusion we've arrived at is that if you analyze everything a bit more like scientifically, what's actually the risk, it seems to us that there is very little risk. There is a huge upside, but then like if we're engineers, it doesn't work out, you go back to having these skills that are super valuable, and a lot of people want you to work for them. It probably doesn't have this huge risk. Then another thing that's commonly thought is that, okay, but like you need to know like business, marketing, design, like so many things. Like you maybe need actually like 10 co-founders to start something. And the answer is probably not. Most startups are started by 2 people, 3. That's normally the case, and there's 2 reasons to that. The first one is that most of these things can be hacked. You could, for example, design. You can get a framework that, like, if you're a programmer, you can like put building blocks and looks really good, and looks as good as the Stripe website, for example. Not the current one, because it's really good, but some of the old Stripe websites. But yeah, it's like you can hack stuff. And then the other reason is that lots of the problems that you will encounter, like I have to create a company, I have to register for tax or stuff like this, the complexity of all of these things that you encounter is very small compared to problems that you're solving at university. So you can learn them on the fly and just like improvise on the go and learn all of this on the fly. And it's not a big deal normally, depending on what you're building. But in lots of cases, you should double test this, because it might be easier than you think. And then there's this other idea, like you all know what are hackathons. Sometimes what separates a startup from a hackathon is just having implemented Stripe. Stripe is a payments platform, and this is actually what happened to us. So in a couple of days, we built the first prototype of HappyScribe, and we had users that were transcribing stuff and things. And then one day we're running on free credits on Google Cloud, and we ran out of credits. And I ran out on my account. Then Andre created an account. We ran out the credits on his account. Then Andre's mother created an account. We ran out her credits, and then Google sent us an email saying like, "What the fuck is what's happening here?" And then like we paused everything. We took the website down, and then back up a couple of days later with Stripe implemented. And then to our surprise, people thought it was valuable enough that they would pay money. And so for us, at that point, we had just worked 2 weeks, I think, on the prototype, and it did seem like the jump from hackathon to startup. The other thing that it's maybe like not appreciated enough is that a really small team today leveraging technology can have a huge impact. And some examples is a Stripe team. They were a handful of people for the first 2 years before they launched on public. And it's pretty incredible how few people they were and the impact that it has had later. And then there's another great example from WhatsApp. The WhatsApp team is ridiculously small, or has always been like super small. And it's a bit weird because I think they program in Fortran or Erlang. But on team size, when they were bought by Facebook, they were serving requests to 450 million users. Monthly users, I think. And there were 35 engineers, just that. And then they were bought by Facebook at this point, and I think like 1 year later or so, they had doubled to 50 people. It's really few people for the amount of impact and users that are serving. So I guess as engineers, you do have a lot of power that you are not realizing. Then why are you building a startup? So we just saw like why it might be easier than you think. You thought it was really hard. Then why it might be a good option. One of the strong reasons is that learning-wise, on a big company, if you go to like a huge like big tech or something like this, you will it depends, but in many cases you will end up working in a small piece of a system. So the type of learning that you'll do is very narrow and very technical. And there's a lot of people that like this, and it's completely fine. Just like two different types of learning. On a early project like a startup, you probably will be working on many different things. You will be wearing many different hats, and you will be collaborating with a few people and building much more complete systems. And one example is when SpaceX now is quite big, but at the beginning it was a startup. It was like super frugal startup, and many extremely great engineers, they were deciding to go to SpaceX because the other options they had in aerospace companies was like Boeing, for example. And there's a real example of a guy that he was going to go to Boeing, and for a year he would be building a screw for some spaceship. And he switched and he went to SpaceX, and then on a team of like 5 people or something like this, they ended up building for a bit of time the whole rocket engine. The same guy. So it's different types of learning. But then when you're in a project where it's so few people and you're touching a bit everything, it gives a lot of ownership as well. What you're building, it feels like it's yours. And this gives us to the next point, that in a good startup, it's going to be yours literally. If you fund the company, you will have shares of the company, of course. But if you join a good early startup, they will give you shares of the company. And this is very important because it's thought to be a very important component in Silicon Valley, for example. This circle of creation of startups again and companies and again. It seems that this plays a big role because people go to work for a company that has huge success, and then all the early team finishes with a lot of resources, and then they build the next generation. and then this happens again and again. So it's an important part of this, and it separates it from going to like a local thing, or going like to a super big tech company where you don't get the benefits of this. And then another thing that is not a bit like overlooked is that the dynamic range of the outcome in most jobs, it can be like very fixed. So it's going to be good or really good, but the dynamic range is quite fixed. And on a startup, it can end up in nothing, of course, but then it can surpass what you would have accomplished at or the outcome of like a normal job. But then once you've surpassed that, there is like next level, and then there is next level, and there is another level, and it's a bit like a game where you pass levels, and the ceiling is super high, and it's quite interesting, like to play these kind of games. So I think I'm running a bit out of time. I'll move a bit fast. There are some common failure modes. One of them is that there's people that really understand how these things work. There's very few people, and it seems like the knowledge of these people has been regurgitated many times, and there's many accelerators and incubators and advisors and a lot of people around this world that they don't know that much, and it can be very confusing. So it's really super important to, and when we started, we had to develop what we call a bullshit radar, where you get this, you have to learn to separate the bullshit from what it actually like seems like true, or seems like very probable that you're gonna use. And there is like probably some of you know Pantomima Full. There is a video on this. It's full of cliches, and a lot of cliches, like you will see them if you move a bit around. It's quite funny. And then there is two more failure modes. One of them is that if it's a project built by a bunch of engineers, they are super obsessed on the tech, but not that much on finding users and having something that people are using. So they spend a lot of time developing super high tech, super amazing, but the part of product market fit, they forget about it, and then it's fundamentally flawed. So and that happens, and you have to be like really careful, because you can spend years working on some super amazing technology, but in the end it has no use. And then there's another failure mode, where if you're a VC-backed company with investors, because the investors are giving you money to run the thing, you forget, and it's like you get confused, and instead of trying to build product for your users and have something that really works, because like the cash is coming from the investors, you get confused and you think that it's actually the investors who are your clients. So then you're optimizing for future rounds instead of a good product, and this can be quite dangerous, because then you can actually do a couple of funding rounds, get like everything like really big, but if you haven't been thinking about the users and the product enough, the product can be fundamentally flawed, and you've built like a huge cake that it's not going to go anywhere. Maybe you can fix it, but that's like the magic. And then to end, just acknowledge that this is just an option, that like different people have different preferences, like different things, and it's like I'm not advocating that you should do, but just like have this information and know that it's an option. It can be very fun. And here are some resources. There's a book, and then some people that it seems they know what they're talking about. Take your own conclusions from this. And I think that's it for the talk. And I think there's not going to be any questions.
Yeah, so we're going to pin the questions on the screen, and we're going to start with Javier, who is again on this talk. Thank you, Javier, for being so proactive. And he asks us that one of the most difficult things after winning a hackathon is finding a good accelerator for bringing the idea to reality. Also, investors are an option.
he would like to know which criteria you believe is the best in order to choose the best accelerator or a trustable investor.
So that's incredibly circumstantial. It will depend on the project. So it's impossible to say like what's the best option, but like know that it's possible. Like you don't need an accelerator and you don't need investors. You might need or not. Yeah, it depends a lot. But be very aware that probably 80% of investors and accelerators are not actually good. So try to separate.
Okay, so I think that was the last question. So we might need to end it here because we're actually running out of time. Sorry to end it like this, but remember, Mark will be on our Discord channel and he's ready to answer any questions that you have. And yeah, thank you for coming, Mark. It was a really interesting talk and we were really happy to have you here. So yeah, remember, it will be on our YouTube channel and be ready for the next one. We're coming right back in.
Sure, guys. Have a nice hackathon.